What's the craziest time your intuition warned you about someone and turned out correct? Hired a guy for our team who had a perfect resume, nailed the interview, had great references, but something felt off the entire time. Nothing I could point to, no red flags on paper, just a gut feeling I kept dismissing because everything checked out logically. 3 months in, we found out he had been copying our internal processes and client data and was quietly building a competing operation on the side using our own systems. The part that stuck with me was that every single person on the hiring panel felt the same unease, and nobody said anything because nobody wanted to be the one to reject a perfect candidate on vibes alone. Now I have a rule. If someone cannot explain why something feels wrong, that is fine. The feeling still gets a seat at the table. Intuition is just pattern recognition your brain has not converted into words yet. Next story. My brother started making me and my sisters uncomfortable when he hit 14 years old. He was weird, did creepy stuff, and we hated spending time with him. Once we moved out, we went LC with him. We didn't trust him around our kids and even warned girls away based on some things he did that were borderline illegal. Caused a lot of family fights. Dad agreed something was wrong with him. Mom felt we were wrong on every point. Now, our brother is in prison for life for crimes against children I can't even fathom. Not just your basic CSA, but damn, only the devil would do. We don't understand why. Has a monster. But we always knew. Next story. When I was a kid, a family friend got married and they held the reception at our house. I got the worst vibes from her new husband and decided to just avoid the party. I was seriously so angry. Like, why are the adults around her not telling her this guy is bad news? My mom said I was being ridiculous. She's so happy. Welp, turns out I was right. A few years later, I hear he was abusive and she escaped. He then stalked her relentlessly, ruining everything she tried to do. She changed her name and had to remove every trace of herself online. Scary. Not glad I was right about that. Next story. I met a guy through a mutual friend who I thought was super cute. He was also sweet and funny and seemed like a great catch. He and I flirted hard and he asked me out. I would have said yes, but something in his eyes just looked off, so my gut was telling me to say no. So I turned him down. 6 months later, his face was plastered all over the news for murdering his therapist and trying to murder his mother. He is spending the rest of his life in prison. Next story. I was working as a flight attendant for American Airlines back in July 2001. The flight wasn't full. There was a group of 4 Middle Eastern men sitting together towards the back of the plane. They really bothered me for some reason, and I kept an eye on them. I can't tell you why, because they were polite. At one point, while I was serving up front, I looked towards the back of the plane and noticed that they had all spread out in different seats throughout the plane. Then I saw one of them crouch down in the back galley. I quickly walked back there and found him crouched over my flight bag, pulling out my flight manual. I yelled at him to get out, and him and his friends started laughing. I wrote up an incident report and submitted it to the company. Then 9/11 happened, and I saw pictures of the men involved in the attack. I recognized 2 of them from that day. I called the FBI hotline that was set up and told them about the incident. They put me on hold and then came back online and told me they already had that information. Still gives me nightmares. Next story. Within 30 minutes of meeting my friend's girlfriend at the time, I told my buddy she is 100% addicted to substances. No one believed me, said she was just nervous to meet people, etc. Anyway, a month later we find out she's a crazy addict who literally spent all day doing substances when my friend catches her doing a line in the bathroom. Relationship just went downhill. Cops got involved, her ex was passed in substances-related incident, and police were all over my friend trying to find this girl. It was insane. Next story. I was a theater student in Long Beach, CA many years ago, and I was also a bit too familiar with the substances scene. There was one guy who dabbled in both, really eccentric. Most striking thing about his appearance was a white blonde bowl cut. He started coming to my apartment to hang out and was trying hard to hook up. He talked a lot about his summers in the wilderness. He claimed he could survive anywhere and commune with nature, and that he was one with the wildlife. He kept telling me I'd love it and hinting that I should go with him. One day, he took off his shirt and was winding it around itself, talking about how clothing could be used as rope. Like, what? And I got super freaked out, and finally admitted to myself that the guy was just too weird to be around. I had to be really rude and forceful to get him to leave me alone. Forgot about him for years, until a movie came out about how his being one with the wildlife resulted in both him and his girlfriend being hit by grizzly bears. Next story. There was a neighbor who always gave me the ick. One day I'm running home, and he pulls over on the shoulder, insisting I should get in so he could drive me home. I took off like a rabbit and ran through the woods to my house. Less than a year later, he is in prison for life on a murder conviction. Next story. There was a guy at a previous job who immediately made my instincts scream that I shouldn't get near him. Didn't even get a word in with me before my instincts were telling me to run.
I was very much a freshly minted adult trying to bumble through life after losing a best friend to cancer though. So when the guy was consistently cool for years and everyone got along with him, I assumed that I was just having a weird reaction stemming from grief, finding myself, and finding my way forward. I eventually got to know him and his wife a little bit outside of work. Not enough to count as a good friend, but enough that I had felt bad for how harshly I'd initially judged him. And then, after a year or so of that loose friendship, he abused a woman. I still examine my gut feelings, but I don't ignore them anymore. Next story. I was on the freeway on the way to work, getting ready to pass a slower moving vehicle. For a reason to this day I don't understand, I decided to slow down and enjoy the ride and not rush. A good thing, too. Suddenly, a car comes onto the freeway from the exit on the other side of the road, crossing the median and flipped over into the ditch. Had I tried to pass the car in front of me, I would have been in the direct path of this out-of-control car and would have had nowhere to go. As it was, I braked and moved out of the way and avoided the crash, which ended up being only a one-car crash with minor injuries, instead of a multi-car collision with either serious or possibly even fatal injuries. Next story. Guy started at my job. He was charming, funny, and well-loved by management, his co-workers, and customers. But not me. There was just something about him. I thought he was super greasy and gross. I treated him just fine, but kept my distance. A few months later, he assaulted my friend in the back room at work after she turned him down for a date. Next story. In the 70s, I drove a Fiat with the top down. I slowly came up behind a truck in front of me. I had my 2 babies with me. I didn't want to pass the truck, but for some reason I moved over to the next lane. Suddenly, a wood panel flew up out of his truck and came down right where my car would have been. I have never forgotten to listen to those gut feelings. Next story. I was hanging out with a large group of friends, and this girl brought her new boyfriend by to introduce him to everyone. He seemed well liked. No one else seemed bothered. The minute they walked out, I burst into tears and started panicking. He's going to hit her. He's physically abusive. Trust me, he's going to hurt her. Everyone thought I was crazy. 6 months later, I get a phone call. He punched a hole in the wall next to her head. My friends no longer think I'm insane. Next story. Not me, but my wife. On a Friday, we purchased a new vehicle from a dealership, and the guy that handled the warranty and add-ons was young, maybe early 20s. I thought he seemed like he had a lot of energy, and was maybe a bit over-friendly. My wife clearly got bad vibes from him. All weekend, she kept mentioning him, and how she didn't trust him. Monday morning, I decided to Google his name, and got a fresh hit from a local news site. Apparently that weekend, he was involved as a car chase with police. He had a trunk full of money and substances. He ran across a farmer's field and hid in a barn until the canine unit flushed him out. Next story. I was introduced to an older, frail man in the early 80s, and my hair stood up on end. My older friend said, "I see they let you out of jail," to the old guy, and he just laughed. They stopped and talked, and I moved quickly away. The sense that he was unnaturally evil was so strong. I later found out that he had been associated with many murder for hire, and the bodies never found. When I encountered him, he had just gotten out of jail for the conspiracy of murder charge for killing his brother. The rest he got away with. He just radiated evil. Next story. This woman walked in to apply for a job, and she instantly gave me such a bad feeling, I threw her application away, something I was in no way authorized to do. She returned when she called about the job, and they said they hadn't received her application, applied again, and was hired. My boyfriend worked there too. He later let me listen to a recording of her begging him to forget about me and have sex with her. Next story. When I was a kid, I got super weird vibes from an uncle who married into the family, and I vividly remember my mom and aunties and grandma at the kitchen island telling me that if I didn't want to be alone around him, I never ever had to be, and I could just leave. And it stuck with me, so I never left my sister or cousins with him alone. Years after they divorced, it turns out he was an abuser. It was a great precedent for trusting my gut. Next story. When I moved to a new place, the next door neighbor was just sitting on his porch drinking beer. Didn't say anything. Looked completely normal. He gave me the biggest alarm bells, spine tingling, I've ever gotten from a person. I generally can read people without a word from them pretty well, and have a track record of this. My roommates, all guys, I'm a woman, kind of brushed it off. But every time he was out there, I just got so anxious and creeped out. Well, one night,
A Tumblr post informed me of the online offender registry, and obviously, out of curiosity, I had to check my area. Sure enough, that guy was a registered offender for assaulting an adult female. I have never felt so vindicated in my life. And after that, one of them always walked me out to my car when I had to leave for work in the middle of the night. Next story. My neighbor was a tough-looking guy. Tatted up, rode a motorcycle. He had his baby mother, his newborn son, and his baby mama's stepdaughter in middle school living with him. His mom lives in the basement. We didn't really agree politically.
He was an old-school type of dude, but as a neighbor, he was really cool. Lent me tools, always helped out when he could. We got along, to say the least. Everyone on the block liked this dude. He always offered to take my wife and I out on his boat, or to go camping. And I always brushed the offer off, because despite him being a great neighbor, there was something about him that just rubbed me the wrong way. My wife always questions why we didn't hang out. I always felt like if we really spent more time together, we just wouldn't get along. Anyway, he was arrested for abusing multiple times over the last 2 years. The house is empty now. It shocked everyone, to say the least. Next story. I was part of a small church, and shortly after a local disaster, we were approached by a woman who explained that she was a pastor in our denomination. She and her husband had recently relocated to our area for his work. This woman, LP for Lady Pastor, explained that she was leading several groups who were struggling with the recent disaster. She hoped to use our facilities for retreats for these groups. Well, that was great. We had a fellowship hall that would allow for overnight stays. And, to help defray the cost of the church, we wanted to offer a retreat facility. Long story short, one of our members had that feeling of, I really don't trust LP, but I cannot say why. We were never paid for any of the 3 retreat groups LP booked. One of our members researched details of LP's backstory. LP was never ordained and had taken advantage of a church in another state. Next story. The babysitter my mother hired tried to kidnap me and one of my younger brothers. I felt like something was wrong and I wouldn't go into her house. My mom was pissed. My dad thought it was funny, but we ended up being left at home, and about a few weeks later, we found out she kidnapped a couple of kids when their parents left them for a 3-day weekend, and when they came to pick up the kids, her house was damn near empty. Next story. Oh, I have one that I repeat constantly. It was such a crazy feeling. Like I've met people that feel off or dislike instantly, but this one time, a friend of a friend came to visit my new house. I had my 8-month-old baby out playing, and he decided to pick up my baby, which by itself is no problem. He had his own wife and kids, so it seemed like a normal, happy interaction. Except, I immediately was scared and horrified this man was holding my baby. I didn't have any off vibes about him before. Actually, even had a small crush when I first met him. But on that day, watching him hold my baby and talk and move, my brain was like, no. I kept my cool. Watched him like a hawk, then took my baby to another room for a nap, and waited till they left. Told my husband he wasn't ever allowed in my house again. My husband was like, what the heck is wrong with you? Months and months later, we hear his foreign wife and child had fled our nice, normal, first world country to a third world country to escape him because he beat them both so badly. I vaguely remember she even got his parental rights terminated, or something similar that showed how fantastically awful he was that even the courts said hell no. I've never had that feeling again, but I tend to be very protective of my kids anyway. But I will definitely listen to my gut feeling over anything else. We have evolved with that intuition for a reason. Next story. I'm not a jealous person. I think men should have female friends, and women should have male friends. This happened twice. In 2 different relationships, I had a gut feeling about a woman. Sinking, unignorable, strong gut feeling. The relationship and communication between my boyfriend and the women were not sus at face value, and I was made to feel crazy and insecure for questioning it both times. No surprise, both times I was being cheated on with said women. I can't explain it. Truly like an inner knowing. I never felt threatened or insecure or suspicious of any other woman in any of my relationships. It was only the 2, when something was actually going on behind my back. Next story. There was a mid-tier reality TV host who was kind of a dumb joke. I always thought he was a total creep. He decided to get into politics by descending a golden escalator and making fun of a handicapped reporter. His team was so inept that they booked a press conference at a landscape company's parking lot instead of the Four Seasons, and he openly tried a coup. Anyway, now he is terrorizing the free world to avoid punishment. Next story. Had a coworker in retail years ago whose spouse would drop by the store from time to chat. Totally normal.
but I didn't like the spouse for some reason that I couldn't put my finger on. A few years later, I'm talking the coworker out of a suicide attempt because their spouse got so abusive they had to leave. For what it's worth, they're divorced now and the coworker is doing a lot better. Next story. Knew a guy back in college who lived in my dorm. We were friends for a while, but I remember feeling like he was the sort of person who acted very nice but wasn't genuinely nice. Like I felt like he was fronting and had a weird vibe. Lost touch with him after our freshman year. Last year, he was arrested for some pretty heinous crimes and will probably spend the rest of his life in prison. Next story. Grew up with a couple kids who later moved far away. Life was good for everyone, we all kept in touch, and eventually the sister got engaged.
I saw one engagement photo and said, "Didn't anyone tell her that her boyfriend is gay?" My mother was beyond pissed at me for years, right up until the phone call saying the woman had walked in on her husband in bed with another man. Next story. I lived in Tucson and worked in Douglas, about 2 hours away. I had an important appointment and was about halfway to Douglas that afternoon, and my gut told me that my now ex, father of my baby, was cheating on me at his office. It was so strong. I literally made a U-turn on the empty 2-lane highway and drove about 45 minutes back to Tucson, knowing I would miss my appointment. I opened the office door, and sure enough, he and our employee were sitting on the floor, watching cartoons after having had sex. They were shocked. I was not. Next story. All the damn time. Especially when it comes to these energetic and charismatic guys. I can't tell you how many times in high school and college some new person would come into our group who fit this description. Immediately, everyone would be obsessed with the guy, while I kept my distance. They'd call me jealous or just a jerk. Meanwhile, interestingly, said guy would be very different with me compared to everyone else, because they knew I could see right through them. Without fail, within a month or two, it would be found out that this perfect dude was actually a piece of crap. Next story. My family has a little summer vacation cabin in the mountains, on a lake, in a pretty remote area. It's a great place to get away from it all. A couple years we spent most of the summer there. Adult daughter expressed interest in visiting while we were up there. We were like, "Great, we'd love to see you." She asked to bring a friend. We were like, "The more the merrier." We paid for their transportation, bus, and 95% of their food and drinks. We picked them up at the local bus station. Right away, I got bad vibes from the friend. I brushed it off at first. Turns out, while we were out, friend decided to go through everything in the cabin and take anything that struck her fancy. I had some meds in a box in a far corner of our bedroom, under 2 other boxes, like cholesterol and diabetes stuff. She helped herself to some pain meds that I had from a not-so-recent dental surgery. We found out. It was too late that night, but we put her on the next bus out of town. Next story. Met a woman with a raspy voice at a bar. Charming at first, until she ordered Fireball. Gave me flashbacks to a certain wild type. Something didn't feel right, so I pulled back. A month later, I saw her getting kicked out of another bar, screaming racial slurs at the top of her lungs. Hence the raspy voice. Dodged a bullet. For me, not drinking anymore probably helps avoid this type of person altogether. Next story. I was with my now ex-girlfriend and got sick suddenly. Every time she touched me, I was so nauseous, and everything just felt super off. She left me to go do something, but I forgot a jacket at her place. I needed. As I was walking up, I saw her making out with some other dude. I just walked past her and went in the house, grabbed my jacket, and left her alone. I suddenly felt so much better after that. Next story. I was a PI and had been following an ex-husband on FRI nights to determine if he was violating visitation parameters. One night he pulled into a closed, dark industrial facility, and I advised wife I was terminating surveillance. She insisted he was oblivious and stupid, and probably needed to pee. Weeks later, he murdered wife, boyfriend, and her mother. Next story. I used to work as an early morning baker, and there was an old couple that came in every morning right when we opened. They were very nice and always appreciative, always excited to see what the daily pastry special was, and have a quick good morning chat with me. I usually baked sweet things, but one day I made a savory scone. The look on one of the guy's faces when I said that I made a savory scone was alarming. He had this sudden darkness about him that was absolutely palpable. I had never seen someone look actually evil before. He didn't say anything, but I'll never forget the look he gave me, and I kept my morning interactions with him short from that moment on. I just knew that he could not be trusted. A few months later, he was in the newspaper because he sawed a guy whom he had imprisoned in his basement and tortured. His mask slipped to me due to a savory scone. Absolutely wild. Next story.
Back in college, I had this roommate who seemed super chill and friendly from day one. Everyone loved him, but something about the way he smiled when no one was looking gave me the creeps. I couldn't explain it, so I ignored it. 2 months later, I came home early and caught him going through my stuff, trying on my clothes, and taking photos. Turns out he had been stealing small things from all of us and selling them online. I moved out the next day. Next story. Next door neighbor was a Marine whose time in the service had ended. All our neighbors were so excited to have this hero loving so close. My wife and I tried to hang out with him a few times because we're all about the same age, but we both concluded that he was super creepy. My hair stood out whenever I was near him. We never could figure out why. He disappeared one day, just never came back. Turns out he was arrested for abusing. Also turns out he was dishonorably discharged from the military for some kind of a crime. He got a 25-year sentence. Next story. This is not my story, but someone close to me. He was a tracker in the army, and during a particular movement of a large group of troops, he was tasked to walk in the front, following the tracks of the enemy when something suddenly told him to stop. He did so, gave the signal to halt, and started looking around for any sign of what could have given him that feeling. As he was looking, his superior put his hand on his shoulder and told him, "Damn, boy, that's a good spot," and cut a tripwire a foot in front of him, which was connected to an anti-personnel mine on either side of the track. Had he walked an extra step, him and several others would have died, injured. He never saw the wire. He just felt something wrong and stopped in his tracks. Next story. I was doing a long drive for 14 plus hours and was driving a couple people as a rideshare to share gas costs. One of the ladies offered to help drive, and when she said that, I saw a vision of a burning car wreck, so I thanked her and held off. About 8 hours into the drive, she revealed she had a brain tumor that made her legally blind. Next story. I witnessed a guy narrowly escape death. He was standing on a narrow median strip halfway across a busy 6-lane road, watching the oncoming traffic for his chance to finish crossing. It was at the bottom of a hill and the road curved. From behind him, a small box truck was coming down the hill, and centripetal force caused the box to sway out over the median strip. It was on a collision course with the man's head. At the very last moment, the man leaned forward, and he never saw the box truck as he was looking the other way, and there was no gap in the traffic to give him reason to lean forward. For taking a first step, I imagine his subconscious prompted him to move after feeling the rush of displaced air, like when a train approaches through a tunnel. Subway. Next story. I worked in a lower-level customer service job. A good-looking man was hired directly from Central Casting. Blonde, strong jaw, straight white teeth, blinding smile. Charming as hell. All the women in the office were gaga over him. He started immediately moving up the ladder of responsibility, given projects over people who had been there years. But I just didn't have a good feeling about him and avoided him. Within 6 months, he was arrested for copying credit card numbers and passing them on to be used. Next story. Not my story, but my mom's. She was staying late at our restaurant with some regulars when this guy came in. She said every fiber of her body was on edge, and she literally had felt sick in his presence. She lied and said they were closing and had already called last call, so the guy left quietly. The other 2 customers hadn't noticed anything. A few days later, it came out in the local paper that the same night the guy that gave her the it came in, he had gone home and murdered his mother. My mom had serious issues afterwards, thinking maybe if she had done something different, if the outcome could have been different. Next story. Had a very weird gut feeling about my then partner cheating, but everything came out clean. He didn't go anywhere suspicious. We worked together. His phone was clean. I then had a dream he cheated. Felt so real. Fast forward a few months, he had a breakdown and broke up with me out of the blue. I asked him straight up if he was seeing someone else. He denied, of course. A week later, I had a dream again that he cheated, but this time I saw the girl too. It was a girl we both work with. And then boom, it all came together. They got together that week. For the last 6-ish months of our relationship, he was cheating on me with her, while I was right in the building, interacting with them both. So people, never ignore that gut feeling. Next story. One night in college, I was leaving from my friend's apartment late to walk 4 blocks home. When I reached the front door of his building, every instinct was telling me to turn back and stay. The next morning, the newspaper reported a woman was abused on that same road, maybe 20 minutes after I tried to leave. I will never ignore my instincts again. Next story. Friend, roommate of mine, had this boyfriend fairly recently. Outwardly, he seemed great. Personable, friendly, if a little awkward. Pushed my friend gently to better herself, made sure she went to her doc appointments, didn't quit her job, tried to get her to finally go get her ged, but something about him made me feel like a feral cat cornered in a trap. I tried to tell her I got weird vibes from him. She wouldn't hear it, claimed I was just jealous of her not spending time with me anymore. He convinced her to move from my place, where she had a good job and easy rent, to 2 hours away. She had to use all her savings for the safety deposit for a new apartment. But okay, she got a job. Things looked good. She and I talked daily, and she said it was great. 7 months later, she calls me in tears. He didn't want to continue to live with her and wanted a break. She asked if she could move back. I said yes. Went and got her and some of her things with plans to go back the next week. On the ride home, she cried, then took a deep breath and told me how he was emotionally abusive, how he would make fun of her for anything she ate and threatened to leave if she gained weight, that he made her quit her job because he didn't like not being able to reach her when he wanted. They also got a cat together, and when she asked if she could take the cat, he pulled out his gun and told her if she tried, he would kill her. And while he didn't want them to be officially together, he was fine with her living with him in a camper instead of the apartment and sleeping with him on occasion. She admitted on that drive back to my house that she should have listened to me when I told her he seemed off. Next story. One time, a friend added a new person to the group chat, like a Discord server. Almost immediately, I sent a message saying, I don't like him. After a few questions, it came out he frequented abuse fantasy subreddits, specifically around harming the elderly. He was booted. Next story. Met a guy at a party who was charming, funny, everyone loved him. Something felt off. Couldn't explain it. Found out 3 months later, he'd been arrested for something I won't type out. Still think about what my brain noticed that my eyes didn't. Next story. Was in a gas station line with my ex, and a guy came up behind her and started whispering insults into her ear. We switched spots and tried to check out as quickly as possible, and the guy started trying to fight me, talking smack and trying to get me to throw the first punch. The macho thing would have been to stand up to him for my girl's honor, but something told me to get the hell out of there, ASAP, and not escalate things. Next day, we saw him on the news. He hit a woman he got in an argument with at the gas station, directly across the street from the one we were at. Police were called. He stabbed and hurt a police officer who had to be airlifted away, and he was shot and killed by the other officers. If I had opened my mouth, that could have been me or my ex. Taught me a lot about de-escalation over showing bravado. Next story. Older half-brother of mine. He abused another brother, who went on to abuse me. My abuser got time in the juvenile rehabilitation system, while half-brother, an adult when that all played out, got away. Half-brother eventually moved halfway across the country, though somehow kept a decent relationship with a lot of our family. I held my tongue for over 20 years keeping the peace, before I met my wife, who was raised in a very similar situation. All those years I knew something was wrong, and was physically ill almost every time he was around. After I met my wife, I went to therapy about the whole situation, because besides right after it happening when I was a child, I had never unpacked it. I slowly started to distance myself and cut what little ties I had with half-brother, after a lot of painful work. Not long after, half-brother went on an international cruise with his family. While entering back into the US, he was flagged for secondary inspection by customs, who apparently were very interested in his electronic devices. I don't know what came of that then, but they did end up releasing him. I knew it couldn't be just a fluke thing with our fairly unique surname, because my wife and I went on a cruise a year after and had no issues. I knew then that justice could be coming, but I still didn't get my hopes up. A little over a year later, half-brother pulls into his work parking lot one morning, where he is arrested by the FBI. So goes the story I was told anyway. He never quit being the creep that he is. He wasn't arrested regarding what happened when I was a child, but they did use that old police report as leverage to keep him detained while his case played out. Weirdly enough, I actually had therapy the day he was arrested, where we discussed the possibility of nothing happening to him. In the few months before his arrest, both my wife and I had a pretty sharp increase in our intuition about him. Just a very weird feeling of impending doom with him at the center. I can't really explain it any other way. In the week before his arrest, I had this horrible cluster headache, unlike anything I've ever experienced. It was just so weird. Haven't experienced anything like that since either. Next story. It wasn't a warning, but a knowing? I had broken up with a man a year earlier, though we still occasionally saw each other as we were both wondering if we shouldn't try rebuilding the relationship. He worked closely with a good friend, so we also got news of each other that way. My friend started bringing a new coworker of hers around to hang out with us. Though at about a month in, this new gal was becoming decidedly unfriendly to me, but the three of us continued to socialize. Around 6 weeks after I met this new lady, the three of us went to a play. I turned to ask her a question, and something went thud in my body. I instantly knew that she was dating my former guy. My friend and I got her home later, and as soon as we were alone, I told my friend this woman was involved with my ex. She scoffed, told me I was nuts, and that if my ex was seriously dating anyone, she would know. A week later, she called and apologized. She flat out confronted my ex earlier in the day, and he admitted he and the new coworker had been seeing each other for a few months on the down low, as the relationship hadn't really taken off to a point he felt comfortable mentioning it to upper management. He managed a different department from the one she worked in. Things got a bit stranger in the next few weeks, and long story, but the gist is that I turned him down for 2 dates, not knowing he had broken up with this new coworker. He then tried one more date with her, finally got her into bed, and she was pregnant by morning. She agreed to marry him a few months before the baby arrived. That marriage, unfortunately, turned into decades of drama, as she does have some serious psychological issues. He finally divorced her, but because of his health and her still needing minding, she's now living again with him, as their adult daughters need a break. Next story. I went to school with a kid that seemed off to me. Never really did anything completely out of the ordinary for the setting, but he always seemed strange. So would be the closest word I can think of to describe him. He is currently in prison for murder. Next story. Not me, my fiance. When we met in 2019, my sister was married to her first husband. They'd been together since I was a kid, and I genuinely loved and thought of him like a brother. My now fiance, but then fresh boyfriend, told me he thought my Bill was cheating on my sister, just based on vibes he had. I was so offended and kind of angry for thinking he knew my family better than I did. Yeah, Bill was cheating with multiple people and had been for years. My sister is now happily married again to a much better man. Next story. So I have a service dog that is Angel at my work, a law firm. It's not unusual for people to come into my office and say, "I just had a really hard deposition, hearing, whatever. Can I cuddle your dog for a minute?" I say this because everyone loves him and he's well trained, even good with babies, and has been appointed as like a therapy dog for the office. Side note, this dog is so in tune to me that he is never off duty or distracted, regardless of if his vest is on or if people are petting him. I explain to people all the time that if he wants pets, I feel better because that means I'm fine, not about to have a panic attack or faint, because he'd never want or accept pets if I was in trouble. I know this isn't normal for most service dogs, but my coworkers are aware of this, and that's the only reason they come in asking for cuddles. Don't do this with other service dogs unless the owner approves. Anyways, a new lawyer started after I had Albus Dumbledog for about 18 months. 17 of those where he came to work with me daily. New guy walks by, and he growled. Albus had never growled at another person before, or since. I thought, weird, but whatever. Maybe he was startled or something. I shush him and get back to work. For the next 2 to 3 months, anytime this guy entered our floor, Albus would growl. It was so weird. I had an interior office about 20 feet from the perpendicular entrance door, so you could not see who was entering when the door opened. You'd only figure it out when they walked past my door about 4 to 6 seconds later to get to the rest of the floor. And almost everyone that worked on that floor entered that way, so the door was open dozens of times a day. And yet somehow, Albus knew when it was him opening the door and would start growling, even when he was under my desk, nowhere near my door, which wouldn't allow him to see down the hallway anyways, but might let him smell a scent. Each time he growled, 5 seconds later, I'd see the new guy walk by and be like, "Yep, knew it had to be him." But how did Albus know? He couldn't even smell or see him yet. New guy eventually complained, and my boss told me I had to control Albus because it wasn't fair to that one employee that he was so hostile. Okay, that's understandable. I reprimanded Albus the next 2 or 3 times it happened, and he stopped growling from then on. But while the entrance door opened dozens of times all day long, he'd still suddenly stand up at attention, as if to guard me, even when he had been napping, and I'd know. It was the new guy about to walk by. It always was. He was never wrong. After another 3 months or so, new guy got fired for lying to his supervisors, missing court hearings, not doing his work, and for what I think is the most egregious, treating the subordinate, support staff like crap, making moms with kids work until 8 p.m. on Friday nights because he was fooling around, even helping himself to snacks and having breaks in front of them while they waited around because he wouldn't let them leave. and calling them at home at midnight to force them to e-file things because he couldn't prioritize his work to be done by 5. Literally, he did inconsequential tasks that could wait a few weeks all day long, and then would start on the brief that was due that very day at 8 p.m. He had this entitled asinine attitude too that I found really off-putting, but tried to accept because maybe it was some type of autism or severe lack of social skills. But no, he was just a a-hole.
So he was fired. But here's the thing. He's still the only person my dog has ever growled out. Ever. Not just in this repeated pattern. In 4 years. And I am positive I will see him on the news someday for some heinous crime. You can't convince me otherwise. Next story. Went on a date with a guy who I got the vibe could be a great time in bed, but I also had no interest in going to his home or having him know where I live. He told a story about a barn burning down and taking the lives of all of his goats. Then 20 minutes later, told me he used to be a pyro when he was a kid. He also made his own knives. I told my friend after I left that I thought that the sex would be wild, but that he would also probably hit me. I found out a few months later that the house he was living in with the barn included his then partner, who he attempted to murder. I felt so vindicated. Next story. Australian author Craig Silvey. Working in bookshops for years, I'd always be told how he was the nicest guy by coworkers and publisher reps. He'd do store visits and was just so charming and likable, and I'd hear nothing but great things. But I always felt there was something not right there. It was like I couldn't see his shadow. Like, I'm used to spotting people's flaws when I meet them. They're insecure about this, they're overcompensating here, etc. But with Craig, it just seemed weirdly flat, like I couldn't get a read on him, which itself was the thing that made my intuition put up red flags. Anyway, years on, and he's been arrested for CP charges and is awaiting trial. Not to say, ha, I knew it, but more, oh, so he just had a really polished front and a really dark core. Next story. I had planned a long road trip. Should have left my house early in the morning, but somehow woke up late. For some reason, I didn't feel like going after a few hours, and got the news of massive accidents on the road I was going to be on. Most likely saved my life. Next story. Got in my car on a very cold morning, and for no reason at all, the thought occurred to me that maybe a stray cat was sleeping in my engine area. Popped the hood, walked over, and holy crap, there was a stray cat in my engine area. Thank God I checked. Would have never forgiven myself for that. Next story. When I was still dating my ex-husband long distance, I had a very vivid dream about him cheating and acting very cold and uncaring when I confronted him in the dream. A few years later, and my dream came true. He did exactly what he did in the dream. Next story. Slightly different example, but years ago my family took a vacation to Canada and rode a scenic train with an overnight stop in the town of Kamloops. This was years before they found the hundreds of bodies at the residential school. As soon as we got into town, me and my whole family were freaked out. There was just something viscerally wrong about the place. We called it Kamloops disease, and were counting down the seconds till we could leave. None of us have ever experienced anything like that before. Years later, when the news broke, none of us were surprised. Next story. Met the IT sergeant my first week at my first duty station. Shook his hand, and I swear the hair on my neck actually stood up. I've gotten weird vibes before, but this was an actual physical response. Anyway, he went to prison for abusing. He was also the barracks NCO, and had the master key to the doors. He'd wait for them to return to their rooms after a night of drinking on the town, then let himself into their rooms and abuse them. My good friend, who was a former stripper, was the one who busted him. He thought she'd be an easy target, given her employment history. She not only beat out of him for trying, she immediately called the MPs. Then nearly all the other women came forward, saying he'd abused them in their rooms. She's a legend. Next story. My husband had a friend from high school who moved away as an adult and then moved back. He stopped by our office, my husband and I worked together, to catch up, and he just gave me such bad vibes. My husband was, "Oh, you and your bad vibes, give people a chance." So I Googled him. He didn't move away. He was in jail for improper sexual contact and had recently been released. Guess he forgot to mention that little detail. My husband has never doubted my bad vibes ever since. Next story. Grew up next to an old couple. The man, about 10 years older than the wife, was the sweetest guy ever. Didn't really interact much with the wife until my neighbor and I needed some sugar to bake some cookies on a summer day. We figured it was the perfect time to go ask a neighbor for sugar. That's what you do in the movies, right? Anyways, only the wife was home. She let us in, gave us sugar, and we went on our way. But the whole time we were in there alone with her, I had the heebie-jeebies, but had no idea why. About 10 years later, she murdered her husband. Next story. I always knew Gunnar was an idiot. He creeped me out the day my aunt dragged his sorry ass into our family. I knew he learned it my cousin. He had 2 kids pass, and later my cousin decided that was the only way out. I hated that prick first, and when he died, my dad called to tell me he croaked, and I said good, I will not go to his funeral. He died way too late IMO. I told everyone for so long he was evil. It took a while, but eventually, everyone finally got it. Next story. Met someone who checked every box on paper. Funny, charming, everyone loved them. But something just felt off. No reason I could explain, just a constant low-level, don't get too close feeling. I kept my distance anyway. A few months later, everything blew up. Turned out they'd been lying to multiple people and stirring up drama behind the scenes the whole time. Nothing dangerous, just messy and manipulative. That was the moment I stopped ignoring that quiet gut feeling, just because I couldn't prove it yet. Next story. As a young professional, a slimy someone who wasn't technically my supervisor, but it was still an uncomfortable power imbalance, repeatedly tried to get me to have sex with him.
I got the ick off the guy immediately, for a multitude of other reasons too. 10 years later, I hear he's been arrested. Next story. In college, I had some pretty sketchy friends. Good people mostly, but with that side of danger. We used to hang out at this club fairly often, and were friendly with a lot of the people we saw on a regular basis. Also, truly sketchy older dudes hanging around, always trying to talk to the younger girls. One night, my ride left early without me, because I usually rode with someone else who wasn't there that night. Sketchy older dude of the month offered me a ride back to campus. Nope. Called another friend. Didn't think much about it. Got on with life. Cue last year. The joys of true crime media. Listening to a podcast where they are talking about a serial killer whose name was suddenly extremely familiar. And so was one of the victims. We thought she'd moved home. Turns out he'd kidnapped her and crossed state lines, which is why I don't know he was a serial killer until recently. He was arrested and tried in another state when she actually escaped. I didn't finish listening to the podcast. Panic attack over 2 decades too late. That night, calling a friend and waiting over an hour for them to come get me was the best decision I have ever made. Next story. I live in a pretty small town, and the neighboring town to mine is only about a 20-minute walk. Only 10-minute walk if you cut through a trail by the side of a field. I had gone through this field at night more times than I care to count to meet up with friends, and we had even messed around a dozen times in that field before this point. One night I get a text from my friend, messaging me to meet up in the middle, since he lived in the other town, and we were going to grab takeaway, head to his, and watch Black Dynamite or something. Anyways, this one night I get to this field as normal, but for some reason I stopped.
Stood under the streetlight, staring into this void I had walked down over 100 times. I have no idea why, but I felt cold and got a spine chill, and decided I was going to walk the normal route, even if it meant taking another 20 minutes to double back on myself. Not even 24 hours later, a news story about that exact field mentioned 2 men hit a man and assaulted a woman popped up on our local news. When I thought about it, I genuinely felt a wave of sickness. If something feels wrong, it's because something is wrong. Next story. I work at an animal sanctuary. One of our cats had had seizures sporadically for a few weeks. When I walked past him, something I can't explain felt off, and I decided to sit with him for a minute. On the surface, he just seemed sleepy, but shortly after, asking a coworker to take a look and give me her opinion, he had a massive seizure that would have kept coming back throughout the night if I hadn't been there. He was given medications to stop it, and has since gone into remission with a new medicine. Next story. After college, I came back to my friend group. They had added a new guy. I immediately was like, who is this guy? He is weird. And they kept saying he is great. He brings drinks and is chill. A few months later, it came out he invited one of the girls over after she got in a fight with her boyfriend, fed her too many drinks, and abused her. Next story. Oh man, I have 2. A couple years ago, a friend of mine was on the way to a modeling gig with a friend of hers. Something about this chick just screamed toxic, even though I'd never met her. It was a can't put my finger on it vibe. They ended up on the side of the road with an overheated Nissan Sentra, and I came out to tow them home and rescue them. My friend stared me down for 2 hours in the rear view while her friend was telling us toxic relationship story after toxic relationship story.
like keying cars, stealing property, literal violence, breaking and entering, literally crazy stuff.
My boyfriend was in the passenger seat, and when we had dropped everybody off, he thanked me for not being insane. Their friendship didn't last long. Same friend, love her to death, but she has a tendency to choose terrible friends. She had a friend she was working with when she was a flight attendant. She had always said really nice things about him, and I didn't know one way or another. I went over to his house with her for his birthday, the first time I met him, and I really did not like him. He felt untrustworthy and manipulative, probably one of the strongest feelings of dislike I can remember having. She asked me what I thought of him, and when she could tell that I was being nice about it, she pushed me to be honest, and I spilled. She was genuinely grateful and started spilling stories of him being crappy. She had been doubting herself and thinking she was overreacting. One in particular, due to a medical condition, she is 28 trying to get her driver's license. During a brief period of time when her and I were not on speaking terms, he took her out to practice, and when she didn't do everything exactly as she should, he started yelling at her and calling her stupid. I was really upset about this, as I had spent a good year helping her build her confidence with driving. Now, whenever she has doubts about somebody, she introduces me, since I tend to have a good sense for people. Next story. I opened the door to a small local grocery. My brain screamed, "That guy is crazy." What guy? A blur in my peripheral vision. I lock my eyes straight ahead and move to the far right aisle. My skin is crawling, but I still haven't seen or heard this guy clearly. I have no idea what is causing this visceral reaction. I slowly make my way along the aisles, trying to give him time to move on, purchase, and leave. I get one aisle over from him, and I can hear he is having a perfectly normal conversation about different spices with the guy who owns the store. I tell myself I've imagined it. I enter his aisle. As I get closer to behind him, I can see the back of his head is one huge tangle of matted hair. I realize my instinct was correct about mental health issues, but he is speaking calmly, and there's no apparent reason to be concerned. I pass him and look over my shoulder. James, Dimitri the lover, Sears. Next story. I was working in retail post-college while looking for a permanent full-time job. During my second holiday season, there was a college kid hired that set off alarm bells in my head, but I couldn't pinpoint why. About a week in, I noticed he would get close to our stock rooms whenever I was inside. I brought it up with the department head, and he said he'd keep an eye on the college kid. 2 weeks later, the department head found the college kid cornering a female coworker on one of the more secluded stock rooms. Thankfully, college kid was fired on the spot. Next story. Senior year, I had a longer commute to school. Something told me to come to a complete stop at a four-way. Well, I did, and a car had been going 10 plus over the speed limit, zoomed down the hill through the stop sign. Had I not come to a complete stop, they would have definitely clipped my rear fender. Well, that morning in third period, we discussed guardian angels. I don't remember the lesson, but I remember something telling me to come to a full stop. Next story. My brother asked if I wanted to grab lunch with him and his wife. Nothing unusual. We hang out and grab food together pretty regularly. I had no reason to think this, but I knew she was pregnant. Yep, I'm gonna be an auntie. Next story. I was an actual college intern, but asked to interview someone before she was hired full-time. I thought she knew her stuff, but didn't really like her, but couldn't put my finger on it. For about 2 months we worked together, me training her, and eating lunch together most days. 3 months later, I found out she was actually deleting my work and telling my boss I wasn't doing it, trying to get me fired. 30 years later, I have no idea why. I was just training her so I could move on to a new job in the same company, which I did before I found out about her sabotage. Some people are just really strange. Next story. I'm a painter. When I was young, I used to work alone. I was painting for an older shut-in in a wealthy neighborhood. 3-day job. I warned him, Thursday I'm going to work a half day. It's my birthday. He lit up with excitement that it was also his birthday. He got a little weird after that. Not like serial killer vibes, but maybe closeted gay, socially awkward, whatever. Thursday morning comes and the door, front door, is ajar. I announce myself and he doesn't react. So I let myself in and he's in his full military dress uniform. He was in his 70s, drinking a quart-sized glass of scotch and staring at a paper on the table. I said good morning, and he said, I'm celebrating our birthday, just admiring my birth certificate, the document on the table. He started offering me furniture, and I was certain he was getting the vibe he was going to lull himself. I went from creeped out to feeling bad. Then he tells me he needs my help in the basement.
swings the basement door open, and insists I go first. No way. Every spider sense I have told me I wouldn't leave that basement. We do the after you dance until I tell him firmly I'm not going down first. He goes down, look at the door, and the hedge is spring-loaded to close behind me. I took off my shoe and placed it to stop the door from closing. He got angry about that and said he forgot what he needed help with, and we both go back upstairs. I say I forgot something in my truck and left immediately. I text him I had an emergency and would be back tomorrow. I came back with a friend, finished the job, and got paid.
He was totally nice, and normally the next day, which made me feel like I was overreacting. But to this day, I'm confident something bad would have happened if I went down that basement. Next story. Was at a party in college, way back in the 1980s. This one guy completely flipped out over something pretty minor, a completely irrational response. Something seemed really off to me about him, much more so than your typical addict overreaction. He kept repeating, "You don't know what I'm capable of." He was later convicted of murder. Got away with it too, for 20 years. But some of his blood was left at the crime scene. 20 years later, he got picked up for domestic violence in another state. Got his blood entered into the national crime base. Matched the murder from 2 decades before. Then he tried to hire someone to rough up a witness and murder the prosecutor. Only the hitman he hired was an undercover cop. So yeah, something told me to stay away from that guy. Oh, he had been sentenced to life without parole, but will be getting out in 5 years because the prosecutor illegally used jailhouse snitches. Next story. 2 stories during an appointment with my neurologist. He did some things that were unsettling. After a few weeks, I talked to a patient advocate at the VA, USA, military hospital. She suggested we just switch providers. I agreed, and I requested a note put in my file to clarify my side of the appointment. A few days later, one of the supervising doctors called, and we walked through the issues. I printed copies of all my neuro appointments, about 10-ish, because I wanted to see if there were any other corrections to be made. They were okay, and I was only concerned about the January appointment. Last week, I went online to see if my request had been honored. My old neuro had deleted my medical record of my bad appointment, March 26th. This is a huge no-no, since the medical file is protected under federal laws. Yesterday, I started working on a formal written complaint about the deleted appointment record. I went into my medical record to make sure I had everything in order. He had changed the record again. I decided to go into all of my visits to see what was different. He deleted part of my November 2024 appointment and changed every single record by removing his header. He was removing the date and timestamps of the records. Thankfully, the system still logs the time of change. He did all of the between 4:48 a.m. to 7 a.m. He could have easily walked away with just a conversation with his supervisor. Instead, he has a formal complaint at the hospital, the VA Inspector General, and Virginia's State Oversight Department. He's in his 50s, and this will not go well for him. Son story. My ex and I owned a cafe, and our son was the manager. Ex left, and I found out some shady stuff he had done. I had a mental breakdown and was hospitalized. We closed the cafe for 2 weeks. Son went to the cafe and made copies of everything on a hard drive. After I got out, we went to the cafe to see what we needed to do to reopen. X had taken out our server, our security system, and everything not related to our point of sale system. Basically, we could run our registers. Son sat down with the hard drive and reinstalled everything. It's been 5 years and I'm still amazed. My son had the foresight to copy the files. I'm still incredibly sad that his father did such a horrible thing to him. He tried to take away Son's legacy. Thankfully, Son was smarter. Next story. Worked at a local Cracker Barrel as a cook for a few years. We had a dishwasher that everyone seemed to love, and he always tried to hang out with me. He was extremely persistent and always tried to find a reason to talk or try and hang outside work. But for some reason, something in me told me that it wasn't a good idea. Well, fast forward 3 years later, I see the guy on the news, and he's arrested for stalking his next-door neighbor and her daughter, killing them both in gross ways I don't care to share, and setting their house on fire to try and hide the evidence. Crazy part is, her daughter was the same age as mine, just a little too close to home for my liking. And yes, this really happened. There's articles and everything online about it. Next story. In college, I went to a house party where a group of my close guy friends lived, along with 1 or 2 other people that I didn't know well. At the party, some guy came up to me, and I immediately got weird vibes from him. At one point, he said, "I like your sweater."
which is pretty innocuous, but he said it in the creepiest way, and I could not shake the weird feeling I had about him. So I got myself out of the conversation and went to my friend who lived at the house to tell him I didn't like the guy and could we ask him to leave. My friend said unfortunately it was his roommate's twin brother who was crashing with them, so he didn't want to throw the guy out. Fine, but still don't like the kid. A week or so later, one of my friends from the house said they were having issues with the guy, and they think he was stealing from several of the roommates, and were going to ask the brother, the one who lives at the house, to tell his bro he needs to move on. There apparently were lots of denials about stealing on his end, but the weird brother left. Sometime later, we find out that the guy had actually murdered a man close to campus, and until then, it has been an unsolved murder. Next story. I was introduced socially to someone who was thinking of investing in a wonderful social enterprise I was vaguely associated with. My subconscious was screaming, "Don't trust this guy." I put it down to hurt ego because he didn't really engage with me, so I didn't say anything to the people who ran the enterprise.
He pulled the investment at the last minute, put them out of business, then scavenged the remains. Next story. Dated a guy right after graduating high school. Had a crush on him for a while. He had graduated a year early and was already in college. Knew what he wanted to do and was taking himself there in a fast track. He was cute, slim, same height as me. After a couple of months, he just seemed off to me. I don't know what it was. Too intense maybe? Broke it off. A couple of years later, he was our state's first road rage killer. Next story. Not me, but my partner. His intuition is incredible. Met my friend's housemate and immediately said something was off about him. Couple of months later, he pinned her to the wall by putting his hands around her neck. Met another friend's girlfriend and said there was something off about her. She ended up keying the friend's daughter's car because she didn't like who the daughter was dating. She was also verbally abusive and an alcoholic. There are so many more situations he's read accurately, but these are the two that stand out in terms of getting a vibe about a person.